Hi, how's everybody doing today? This is Mickey. Today I'd like to spend some time going through the new feature in Lightroom called Lens Blur. Now, typically lens blur, or a soft background, is something that we use when we use a low f-stop shooting portraits, or when we're shooting a landscape that has a very close-up view to it. Everything else is out of focus in the background. Or we're just using some kind of blurring effect so that we can bring the subject's eyes into the area of the photograph we want them to see first. In any case, it's not a feature that we use all the time. And because of that, I just wanted to go through all the tools and the pieces part of Lens Tool or Lens Blur so that when we do have the chance to use it, that we can use it effectively because we know how it works and all the pieces parts to it. To start out with, Lens Blur is in the Develop module under its own tab called Lens Blur, and you'll see next to it Early Access. And if you happen to click on that button, it's going to bring up this dialog box telling you it's an early access, kind of a beta feature, and if you want to share any feedback, you can using that link. To activate Lens Blur, we're going to click on Lens Blur or the down arrow, and we're going to click Apply. When we click Apply, AI is going to find the subject of the photograph and apply a blur effect everything around it. So you just saw it finish its analysis, and you can see that it's found the subject here and everything else is blurry. If we look at our tool, the first thing we see is the blur amount, and of course it's self-explanatory. If we increase the blur amount, you can see everything around gets blurry with our subject remaining in focus. The next thing that we see is called Bokeh. Now, it allows us to have 5 different types of Bokeh. And I'm going to kind of zoom in on the picture here so we can see specifically the Bokeh in this photograph, and it'll better demonstrate what this does. The first one that we see is called Circle, and it's just the typical Bokeh you will find in present day or our current lenses. And once you have the Bokeh defined that you want to use out of these 5, you can adjust it by changing the boost slider, and it will make the Bokeh stronger or weaker depending on the Bokeh that you've selected. The next one you find is called Bubble, and that's a standard circular type that you find on just about any lens, and depending on the f-stop that you have set and the light that you have behind you will give you this a bubble. The next you usually find in vintage lenses. It's called a 5-blade. And, the aperture of your lens is composed of blades. So some of the older lenses only have 5 blades, thus you get the name 5-blade. It gives it more of a diagonal look to it. The next one is called ring or donut sometimes, and we see this in reflex or mirror lenses, kind of older lenses, or long-range lenses that use mirrors. And final one that we see is called cat eye, and this is caused by optical vignetting. It's not really the best bokeh that we probably want in our photograph. Next below, what we see is focal range, and this is the range, and it's represented by this slider right here. Yellow being in focus, blue, purple, and black being the areas of out of focus. So it's giving you an idea of the range of focus that it's using to compose this photograph. Now if we turn on Visualize Depth, it will show those colors on the photograph itself. So anything that's in a yellow or orange is the in focus area, and as it progressively gets out of focus, you see purple and you see black. Now you can change the range of focus by grabbing this little dot here and sliding the focus range back and forth. And when you do that, you'll see areas of white. The areas of white are the areas that it's saying it's going to keep in focus. So as we move it back and forth, you can see we've changed the focus to the background. And if we turn off Visualize Depth, you can see that the background is more in focus. So if we move it forward, we now have our subject in focus. Now, let me explain one thing first about this focal range. If the photograph was not in focus on its inception, when it was made, this tool is not going to sharpen the photograph. All right. I've talked to some people, and they were a little dismayed that they brought the focus, we'll say, back here to these windows, and it was still blurry. Well, it was blurry when they took the photograph, so it's not going to increase or sharpen the photograph, increase the focus. It's just going to bring it more in focus, or to the original focus point it was when you first took the photograph. All right, so as we move this slider back and forth, we can change our area of focus. Then we can grab these little sliders on the side and we can narrow the range of focus. So here you can see we've narrowly ranged the focus to our subject right here in the center. If we turn on the visualize depth, you can see that this area that we've chosen, this yellow area, is the only area that's going to be in focus. Now, you can also select different areas of focus by using the subject icon. When you choose this, it chooses the original subject that was applied when you first clicked the apply button, or the checkbox. You can also choose this icon here, and you can see it gives me a crosshair icon, and you can circle an area that you want to be the area of focus. So when we do that, it brings the focus area to here. Now let me explain this too, because some people don't understand. It's not applying a new focus to this area. All it's doing is moving this automatically for you based on the area that you selected. So if we choose, let's look at an area that's like this area right here. So this is deep out of focus. Now let's go take visual depth and turn it off. We're going to choose our little icon here, and we're going to circle this area. Now I want you to notice here, right now we have this central area of focus, but we're going to choose this area as our new area of focus, and I want you to watch what happens over here. So I'm going to outline this area, and as you see, all it did was extend out the area of focus, so it included some of the subject and some of this. So it's not regenerating a map of the focus area. All it's doing is automatically moving the area of focus slider to that area that you have designated. All right. Now you can also kind of visualize the area of focus when you're doing this by holding your Option key down. And when you hold your Option key down and you start moving this area, you'll see that anything in white is going to be in focus. Anything that's not white is not going to be in focus, or it's going to be, purple and orange, purple being way out of focus, orange being kind of out of focus. So by holding your Option key and moving your sliders around, you get to see what areas are going to be in focus ahead of time. So if we move here, you can see the white of the background is in focus and our subject is not in focus, even though it's showing orange and yellow, which generally indicates an in focus area. As we move this slider, she is no longer in focus. So that's one thing you have to remember. When we're looking at the visual depth map, we're seeing the map that AI has applied. All right, so this is what's in focus. These areas are out of focus. When we start manually changing it, we hold the Option key down. Let's turn off visualize depth. We'll hold our Option key down and we'll start moving our focus. The key color to remember is white. White is what is in focus when we're doing our manual changes. All right, the colors that we're seeing under the depth map are just those colors that was originally made when the depth map was constructed by AI. When we're manually doing the changes, white is the area of focus. So right now I have my Option key down and I'm moving my area of focus to where the area of white are those bags, our subject, and some of the table. Now let's let go and look, and you can see we have an area of focus here, an area of focus here, and a semi-focused area here, and everything else is out of focus. And you can see if I move my slider, my blur slider, you can see what it is. We can also click on a little eye here and take away the effect, and you can see that the blur effect is very prominent there once we do that. All right, so that's our focal range and how we can change our focus area. Next, we can modify our focused area by using our focus and blur tool. And this essentially is exactly like your paintbrush tool when you're masking with a brush in Lightroom. So if we click on focus, we now see we have an amount slider, a size, feather, and flow. This is no different than when you're using your brush with masking. Amount means how much of the blur are we going to apply when we brush across the picture. The size actually is the size of the brush, and the same tools apply. Left bracket key to make it smaller, right bracket key to make it larger. All right? And then the inner ring is our feather. We can change that by changing the feather slider here, or you can hold your shift key and left bracket and right bracket makes the feather bigger. Left bracket makes the feather smaller. All right, so once we choose our brush size, we can change focus, and we can, like, let's say we want to focus this area right here. We can just brush across this area and we can bring in focus. Again, it's not going to sharpen the picture. It's only going to bring into focus the focus level you had when you took the photograph. All right? So that's how we can just bring an area to focus just by brushing across it. And we can do the very same thing with blur. So now we want to blur this area, and we can just run across it just like this and blur the area even more. Now, we also have flow. So flow is just like with a brush. If we only want to apply 50% of the effect each time we brush across, then we change it to 50. If we have it at 100, we're going to apply the full effect each time we brush. So we're working just like a brush. It also gives us auto mask. So if we turn auto mask on, wherever the crosshair is resting when we're brushing, that is the color, the only color that will be affected by the focus. So, or the change in focus. So let's click on focus, and we just want to get this center bar right here. We want to make it a little more focused. So I'm going to make my flow 100%. My feather, I'm going to make it a little more narrow, like 23%. And my size, I'm going to make a little smaller. And all I'm going to do is brush across, keeping my crosshair on this metal bar in the center. And as I do it, you see it changes the focus, but it doesn't go off into the glass because that's a different color. So we're getting to use our auto mask feature to help generate a better line of focus when we're using our brush. Now once you have everything brushed, you can also see the area you brushed by clicking on Visualize Depth, and the area that you're brushing will either get lighter or darker depending on what you're doing. So we have a plus arrow here and we're on focus, so I'm going to brush across here, and as I do, you can see I'm changing the light color of this area, and that means that area is being affected to be in focus. Remember, a lighter color is an area of focus. You can also hold your Option key down, and you can see the plus mark turns to a minus. We're now in blur. So now I can change the focus area to a blurred area, like this. So using the depth map when you paint might help you get a little more precise when you're manually changing your focus using your focus or blur tool. You can also just turn the Visualize Depth off and just watch it as you paint. So we'll turn the amount way up, we'll change it to 100%, and we'll keep our size and feather and flow as they are, and we'll just start painting on blur. So as we paint, you can see it's getting blurrier. I can keep up with it pretty easy just by doing it visually without using the depth map. And if we wanted to bring it back in focus, we go over here to focus, and we can paint on this area and bring it more into focus. This allows us to touch up an area that we want to make part of our focus area when AI didn't find it to be such. Now if you want, you can hold your Option key down and grab your slider here, and you can see the area of focus that we painted is now white. So this is kind of a way to confirm the area that you manually painted, that it's in the area that you wanted it to be in. All right, now that we've gone through the basics of the tool, let's look at another picture. And let's shrink this down to fit size. And we're going to hit apply. And I just want to show you how well AI works in defining the subject and the areas that it puts out of focus. So here it's done its analysis, And you can see that it has selected the subject, and we're going to increase the blur amount just to make it more prominent. It has selected the subject, and not only has it selected the subject, but it's grabbed the area of focus from the bottom and just gradually brought it out of focus. So let's look at our depth map. And you can see, here's our subject, and it gradually fades away with the focus getting blurrier and blurrier. And that's just phenomenal work for AI to realize that we want this whole area to be in focus. We don't just want the subject, and we want it to gradually fade away. Now, again, you can change this manually if you would like. Let's say we wanted this area to be a little more out of focus. We could go to our blur tool. We'll choose a lower amount, and we'll make a bigger brush, and all we want to do is make this area a little more out of focus so we bring more attention to the subject, because over here it's out of focus. Here it's not quite as much out of focus. So we're just going to make sure we're on blur, that we have our size, our feather, and let's turn our flow down just a little bit, which will put the effect down a little slower. And we'll just start painting across our canvas here. Let's turn auto mask on, because you can see it's kind of missing this area right here. We don't want auto mask here. So let's just do like this. All right, so now we kind of have a uniform color all the way to the second step. And if we look at our picture now, you can now see that it's a little more out of focus than it was before, with just the manual changes that we did. And the great thing about this, when we do our manual painting in, the amount slider, it still is going to increase the blur if we want it to be. So once you get the effect painted in where you want, you still have control over the amount of blur that you can apply to the photograph. I just think it's just really phenomenal that AI finds our subject and then gradually takes that focus out as it moves back, even when the subject matter, these stairs, could be very prominent in the picture, and it realizes that and puts the effect exactly like it should be. All right, we're going to do one more example here, and in this picture you can tell it's pretty much in focus from foreground to background. It's taken with a drone in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, and we want to apply a tilt shift lens effect. And if you're not familiar with it, tilt shift lens lets you apply a specific area of focus, and we're going to look at this center area of focus. And when you do that, you get out of focus at the top, out of focus at the bottom, with focus in the center. And when that's done, it kind of makes it look like a miniature town in effect. It's kind of a really neat effect. So to do that, we're going to hit the apply button, and you can see it's going to analyze the picture, and it's going to apply the effect. And when it does, you can see by our map here, let's turn our visual depth map on, that we have everything in focus in the front, and it just kind of fades off to the back. And that's not what I want. All right, I just want this center part to be in focus. Now, there's several different ways we could do this, but I'm going to show you the way that I use, and it's probably the quickest way. I'm going to grab my depth map here, and I'm going to narrow it down to the very edge of the photograph, so when we look at the photograph, everything is out of focus. Just about everything. This is not out of focus, and I really even want this out of focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my blur, and I'm going to set it about 50% on the amount and the flow about 50%, and I'm going to brush across here, and I'm going to take this out of focus too. All right, and let's crank down the amount a little bit. I didn't want that much out of focus. Remember, our amount slider still works for us, so we can get it out here. Now everything else, the amount slider, this was done automatically. We can use the blur amount slider up here, and we can bring the focus a little down that way. So now we have our whole picture out of focus, but what I'm concerned about is I want this center part in focus so we can get the tilt shift effect. And to do that, we're going to grab our focus brush. I'm going to turn the amount up. I'm going to turn the size up to about the area that I want. So let's see. Let's make the brush about the size of the city street that I'm wanting to bring into focus. I'm going to have a very narrow feather, about 40%, and I want 100% flow. All right, and now I'm just going to brush across the area that I want be in focus, just like this. Now I got a little bit too much, so I'm going to apply a little more blur down here. I'll turn the blur up. I just want some of this area still in blur. About like this. And there we have our tilt shift effect. So what was before, everything was kind of sharp and in focus, and it looks like a little town on the coast. Now we put a tilt shift effect on it, and it kind of looks like a town in miniature. It's just a really neat effect. That's a really good, this blur tool is a really good tool to use to apply this effect. Alright, this is the last thing I'm going to show you. This is something who people are a little familiar with. Photoshop that you can do. We're going to reset this picture, and we're going to do the same thing in Photoshop. We're going to apply the tilt shift effect to this, but you could use any of these photographs to work on this in Photoshop. In fact, let's do this. Let's grab this picture right here. Let's reset it, and let's launch into Photoshop. So we're going to go under Photo, Edit in Photoshop. And what we want to do is that we want to apply the blur to the entire photograph. Okay, here we are in Photoshop, and what we want to do is apply the blur effect to this photograph, and then put a radial filter on to bring the area in focus just around the young lady. So it's good to know that the lens blur effect is also available in Adobe Camera Raw. So a Camera Raw is just like Lightroom. It's just a filter in Photoshop. So what we want to do, we want to go to background, and we want to hit Command J. And what that does, it creates a new layer. And this is the layer we're going to apply the blur effect on. So we click on layer 1, we go up to filter, and we choose Camera Raw filter. This is going to launch essentially the same thing as Lightroom. And you can see it looks a little different, but it's got all the same effects and controls that you have in Lightroom. So we want to apply the lens blur filter. Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw is going to analyze the filter, and it's going to apply the blur. Once the blur is applied, we're going to do like we did before. We're going to take the area of focus down to about nothing. All right, so everything is out of focus, and that's fine. And if you want to adjust your bokeh, let's say we want to make it a lot stronger, we can do that. Now all we want to do is hit OK, and what that's going to do is apply the effect to the layer. That's layer number 1. So if we turn off layer 1, we can see here's our background. It's in focus, and we turn on layer 1 and everything's out of focus. Now we want to apply a mask to layer 1, so we're going to go down here and we're going to click on layer mask, and it's going to be a white layer mask. Now we want to apply a radial brush, so we're going to choose our radial gradient right here. We're going to choose our circular gradient, and we're going to drag, here's our icon, we're going to drag across our subject about like this. We're going to widen it up, move it down a little bit. We might want to make it a little smaller, maybe a little wider. Just fiddle with it here just a little bit. If we hover over the edge, you can see we get a little arrow icon. We can rotate it around. We can make it wider. Bring it down a little bit, about like this. If we hold the center button, we can move everything. And then we have 2 diagonals here. This is the feather of the radial. So we can move the feather in and out. I'll move it to about right there. And this is the outer feather. So we can refine it just a little bit better. Once we have that in place, now we have our subject in focus, just her, and then the background gradually, with the gradient, gradually gets softer and softer till we just have our subject in focus and the background out of focus. We can go up here to File, Save. It will then take this photograph with both these layers, and it will move it to Lightroom. It'll put it in right next to our other one. So here we have, now back in Lightroom, our subject out of focus using the Lens Blur tool in Adobe Camera Raw, modifying it with a radial gradient, and then saving it and moving it back to Lightroom. This is a really nice effect. Whether you like to use Lightroom or Photoshop, you can do it with Lens Blur in both places. I hope this helps everybody out. If anybody has any questions on how to use Lens Blur, just shoot me an email. I'll be glad to help you any way I can. I'll talk to you all soon.